Next from Springfield, we talk to Phil Gonet, president of the Illinois Coal Association, and get his thoughts on President Obama's deal with China on limiting carbon emissions, the necessity of coal and natural gas for energy production, and the effect of coal regulations on the cost of electricity. This runs about 30 minutes.
Phil Gonet with the Illinois Coal Association. Thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
The other day, following the election, President Obama came out with a proposal that would be, well, he went to China and they announced an agreement with China that the United States would cut back on carbon emissions into the atmosphere by some 25% over the next 11 years, I believe it is. Whereas China has to make no cutbacks at this time. They can continue to increase their carbon emissions until 2030, and then at that point, wherever their carbon emissions are, they're not supposed to exceed that. What is your reaction, first of all, to the agreement?
Totally meaningless. I mean, it's just, not to be, smart or anything, but it doesn't have the effect of a treaty or anything like that. To not impose standards on China that are less stringent than the United States puts us economically at a disadvantage. It's a global marketplace out there. I'm not sure how much different that proposal is from the one that's on the table that he announced on June 2nd, and that's a reduction in CO2 emissions. And I haven't looked at that, but let's say they're the same. To me, I think that's just meaningless, but it's part of the president's campaign worldwide to try to get buy-in from the other countries to reduce carbon emissions, which, at least the coal industry in this country think are harmful, will be harmful to the economy and make no impact on global carbon emissions.
Given the restrictions that are currently in place, what impact are they having on the Coal Association? Or coal, not the association, but on the coal producers in Illinois?
Well, right now, none. The way the proposed rule is set up is that states are to develop their compliance plans. But actually, US EPA has until June of next year to come up with the final guidelines. And then the states have a year after that to develop specific plans. The feds have put out what they call building blocks. There's 4 building blocks where you would have efficiencies in current coal-fired units, use natural gas, increase renewable energy, and just assume that electricity usage can be reduced by 10 to 12% by 2025. And those are the 4 building blocks that they put out there as kind of the outline for states then to come up with the plan to make the reductions. There's a lot of problems with that. It doesn't have an immediate impact on the coal industry, but long term it will, because the only technology that can meet the emissions limits is carbon capture and storage. And that's not a technology that's been proven. It's not commercially viable today, and it's simply putting the cart before the horse. President Bush II proposed FutureGen in February 2003. Here we are, 11 and a half years later, and we have no steel in the ground. And in fact, the project has been downgraded from a freestanding coal-burning power plant in Mattoon, Illinois, to retrofitting a 60-year-old power plant in Meredosia. We're for it because it's going to use Illinois coal. It'll allow Illinois coal to be used, but it's not advancing the technology in any type of speed that's going to be able to allow coal-burning power plants to meet the emission standards. So, it's a difficult situation, and so we're predicting that it's going to force power plants offline. It's going to thereby increase the cost of electricity, and consumers are going to have to pay more. And we think that that falls mainly on the poor that spend more of their disposable income on energy than others.
You know, a lot of people may say, I don't really care about the coal association or the coal companies, or I don't understand why we can't go with wind and solar. Now, what's wrong with that argument? Why can't we replace coal with wind and solar?
Okay. The key thing here is base load power. That means it can be in operation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Neither wind nor solar, I mean, it just defies logic that doesn't happen. Wind, we have a lot of experience with now, is available and in use about a third of the time that we need it. Solar, obviously, can only generate electricity when the sun is out. And a cloudy day like today, who knows? So you need backup. I mean, what you need in order to provide the electricity, it has to be cheap, reliable, and plentiful. And neither wind nor solar have those attributes. Now, for the Coal Association and the coal industry in general, we're for an all of the above energy strategy. I mean, wind and solar, biomass, hydro, nuclear, natural gas, that all has to be part of the energy mix. But this specific proposal by the president cuts out coal. And we think as a base load power source, that is going to lead to blackouts and brownouts and increases in cost of electricity, because it's economics 101. When supply is scarce and demand is equal or high, prices will increase. And I think the problem, and I hate to say this as a problem because people would suffer, everyone said with the polar vortex last year that if the American Electric Power in Ohio, based in Ohio, if they hadn't had their coal-burning power plants available to turn on, which they had planned to turn off and are not going to be available this winter, if they didn't have them last year, we would have had rolling blackouts around the Midwest. Well, too bad we didn't, because no one has felt the pain. And I hate to say that because you don't want people to experience pain, but we've been saying for too many years there's going to be a scarcity of electricity, which means it's not going to be reliable, and what's available is going to be expensive. And that just hasn't happened. So people haven't experienced the pain yet to see the destructive nature of the proposal. And like I say, you know, in all of the above strategy. The other thing that they emphasize is how you solve this is with natural gas. Well, natural gas is plentiful again in the United States because of fracking, which of course the environmentalists attack is harmful to the environment. So, you know, what are you going to do? So the environment, in fact, the Sierra Club now thinks all fossil fuels are bad after they took $50 million from Michael Bloomberg, from Chesapeake Energy, which is a natural gas company. They decided all the fossil fuels are bad, so now even natural gas is. But to me, and I, as you know, I was in charge of a power plant, a utility in Speel. To me, using natural gas to make electricity is a waste of natural gas. And what you're going to create at times during the year are shortages in that, where the prices will spike up. And if you look at the last 40 years, the history on the market prices of natural gas, you get spikes like this. And that should be used, I mean, for heating homes. The majority of homes in Illinois are heated with natural gas. So if you start using it for base load power plants to make electricity, natural gas, which can be done, then that means it's going to be less available when you might need it during the winter and susceptible to price spikes. The other thing too is, and this really bothers me a lot, that the US EPA has even admitted this, that the Obama plan to reduce carbon emissions will have less than a 2% impact on global emissions, CO2 emissions. Doesn't anyone do cost-benefit analyses anymore? And I think because no one has felt any pain, they don't think it's going to come. We're crying wolf. We're here just to keep our industry afloat. I mean, we know this country has survived economically with a coal-based energy source. And you take that away and you don't have anything to replace it, because renewables are not cheap, they're not reliable, and they're not plentiful. And those are the three standards that you need to judge energy sources.
A couple of points I would like to have people understand. One is that the vast majority of our electricity and demand continues to grow. And if we move to electric cars, it would grow even more. The vast majority of our electricity around the United States is produced by coal.
Right.
I believe the number is 80% of the electric in Kentucky is produced by coal. Illinois is relatively low in that it's 40% produced by coal, I believe, and that's primarily because Illinois is one of the bigger states as far as the use of nuclear.
The largest.
The largest.
And it's about 45-45 in Illinois, the split, nuclear and coal.
But to go back to the renewables, wind and solar is contributing, I forget the exact number now, but something only like, was it 5 or 6%?
Right.
So that to take the coal out of the equation to any extent means you're either going to be having to, you're going to have to replace it with something. You may have to replace it with nuclear power. I don't know how much more capacity they have to generate more. And so it's a bit of a quandary. But one of the things that for a number of years, or not so many years ago, Illinois coal producers were kind of on the outs because Illinois coal is so filled with high sulfur
Right.
compared to coal from some of the other areas around the country.
Right.
But now, am I not correct that with scrubbers and the smokestacks, while they're expensive, then one can use Illinois coal, and I believe the production of Illinois coal is back up to...
We're up over 50 million tons, yeah. The brief history on Illinois coal production, we were chugging along 60 million plus tons a year, 1990, which was the year that the Clean Air Act was amended to require reductions in SO2 emissions, which was a good thing. SO2, sulfur dioxide, is a harmful gas, and that was the right thing to do. There was a cap and trade program that was established, so you could comply by continuing to use dirty coal or burn dirty coal without a scrubber, because the capital expense of putting on a scrubber worked into the cost of energy. So you could buy allowances because they were there from companies that overcomplied. You were given a base number of allowances based upon your usage over a period of time. And so you could comply that way by using allowances. You could comply by putting on a scrubber. You could comply by shutting off your power plant. And so speaking for Springfield City Water, Light and Power, they did a combination of allowances, and they had a scrubber on one unit, and then in the late 90s they put a scrubber on the other unit so they could comply. And
What does a scrubber cost, by the way? You were, I believe, the head
Yeah.
of CWLP at the time, which is the Springfield Municipal Power Plant.
yeah, that one, and I don't have the per kilowatt hour cost. I mean, ours here in Springfield costs about 40 million. The Baldwin plant that Illinois Power owned at one time, I think they had 3 or 4 units at that station that they had planned to put on scrubbers that they canceled, and was going to cost upwards to $500 million. And the history in this state of what happened, when it was led by Commonwealth Edison at the time.
But do scrubbers, number one, work? And after you
Yes.
spend 40 or 50 million dollars, is that like an air filter in our furnace that you have to change them out every so often, or what's the operating cost with those?
Good questions. It works, yes. In fact, the removal rate of sulfur dioxide at City Water, Light and Power today is like 99.5%. So number one, it works. Yes, there is an increase in operational costs because it's a piece of pollution control equipment, so it needs to be maintained, it needs to be taken care of. And so there's extra operational costs, and all these costs are passed on to the consumer. But that technology has been perfected. And I guess jumping back to the CO2 issue, that's where I'm concerned, because there's a lot of time you'll hear people say, well, you know, cap and trade work well for sulfur dioxide. It can work the same way with carbon. And there's a stark difference there. Back when the SO2 limits became law, there was a technology scrubber that you could comply. There was an alternative fuel source. There was low sulfur coal, either from Appalachia or the Powder River Basin in Wyoming. So there were different ways that you could comply. Today, with the carbon rule, there is no carbon capture and storage technology available. It's developing, but it's not commercially proven and available today. So there's no alternative to coal. So you either shut down your power plant, or you pay a higher price, I guess, for if it's a cap and trade program, which ends up just costing consumers more.
So, given the technology of the scrubbers, coal is almost, in Illinois, coal production is almost back to where it was in the 1990.
1990, we're at 62 million. We declined to 31 million by 2003. And then slowly, the cap and trade on sulfur dioxide worked, because a lot of the power plants on the East Coast, the price of compliance coal or lower sulfur coal became more expensive. So economically, it made sense for them to put on the equipment, make the capital expenditure, and they could still sell electricity at reasonable rates.
What does a ton of coal in Illinois go for, roughly?
About $40 a ton today.
And what would the low sulfur coal go for?
$7 or $8 a ton, and that's basically in Wyoming. And most people don't know, 55 million tons of coal.
You $7 or
$8 a ton.
The low sulfur is going for that?
Yes.
Well, why don't people use the low sulfur?
They do. 55 million tons of low sulfur coal, mainly from Wyoming, come in to be burned in Illinois power plants every year. And it costs, let's make it $10. We'll round it to 10. It's been as low as $4 or $5 a ton. In Wyoming, they have coal seams. They're surface mines. They are 80 feet thick. You scratch the surface a few feet, not even 50 feet, and you have an 80-foot coal seam that is easy to extract. So they have virtually no expenses to extract it. Their biggest cost is sending it by train from Wyoming to Illinois. And that costs about, let's say, $30 a ton. So that's where the price difference comes in. And the Commerce Commission Illinois Commerce Commission made a very important policy decision back in the late 80s. And they said that the transportation costs of coal, to get coal to the power plant, was part of the fuel cost that was immediately recoverable through the fuel adjustment clause. Critical thing in Illinois in terms of regulatory impact, because what that meant is that instead of making the capital addition to your power plant and then going to the Commerce Commission and getting a rate increase to get that capital addition into your rate base so you could earn a rate of return on that, that's how rate of return regulation works, they bypassed all of that. So they didn't have to spend multi-millions of dollars, or even billions of dollars in the case of Commonwealth Edison, to put on the pollution control equipment. And if you recall, at that time, in the late 70s and early 80s, they're trying to get their nuclear power plants in rate base, and the environmentalists were challenging that because Commonwealth Edison pretty much overestimated the need for electricity. In fact, it was before my time, but the term too cheap to meter was a term that you heard with nuclear power all the time. They weren't going to put meters in people's homes because it was going to be too cheap to meter. And then 3 Mile Island happened and all of the increased regulations. We had the Clinton power plant that had a original cost of $200 million. I think the final cost was $3 billion. And so all of a sudden, you know, this explosion in cost in nuclear. And so, and his Edison being challenged by the Citizens Utility Board saying, you overbuilt. You've got power plants that are not necessary, and you should only earn a rate of return on that part that is used and useful. That was a key term in regulatory bodies back in the 80s and 90s. What part of that plant is used and useful, which was a concept that was unheard of at the time. I mean, when you built a coal-burning power plant, you don't build it for your base load for the next year. You build it for your base load for the next 20 years, and you're allowed to earn a rate of return over that 20 years. Well, the environmentalists were pretty successful in knocking Edison down and saying, no, only if only 60% of this is used and useful today, that's what goes into your rate base, and that you can earn money through your rates. And so they said, we can't take the risk of putting on pollution control equipment to meet the new SO2 emission standards and not get sufficient rates. So we're going to ship in coal from Wyoming, and we can recover 100% of the coal costs and 100% of the transportation costs through the fuel adjustment clause in everyone's monthly bills, and all they had to do was minor modifications of their boilers to be able to use the lower sulfur coal.
Let me ask that, on the coal-fired plants we have today, one, how many are there? Two, are they going to continue operating, or are they scheduled, as you say, a number of the electric producers are taking those coal-fired plants offline because of the cost of becoming compliant with federal policy. Where are we as far as having the capacity from coal-fired plants to produce the electricity we need?
Yeah, in Illinois, there's about, and I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, let's say there's about 18 stations, power stations around the state that burn coal. And a station is like CWLP that has 4 units. So there might be 50 units and 16, 17, or 18 stations. Dahlman 4 and Prairie State Energy Campus in Washington County are the 2 recent that have come on since the year 2000. The last plant before those 2 to come on was the Newton Power Plant in Jasper County in like the late 70s. My point is that 60% of the power plants in Illinois are 50 years old or older, and a lot of them are either too old or too small to put on the pollution control equipment to meet these standards. So that's what's forcing them offline, even before you consider the carbon standard, which none of them can meet. And so we just think, and then when you take on top of that Illinois is a deregulated state, which means if Midwest Generation, that owns the old Commonwealth Edison power plants, it's hard for them to make capital expenditures to improve the efficiencies of their power plant, because it's going to make their rates that they need to charge to recover their costs impossible to get through consumers. And so it's better for them. And these plants have been used for years and years and years, and they've passed their useful life at the beginning of their operation, and they can just shut them off and they can walk away. And so that's
how big of a hole will that leave us short of the power we need?
Huge. And people point.
And then they'll have to buy it from out of state, I guess.
Right.
And that will be, one would think, at a higher cost.
Well, you get transportation costs, transmission costs to bring in the power, and that's scheduled by either the Midwest system operator, because now transmission in this country is now regulated by quasi-independent grid companies, and there are 2 in Illinois, which kind of complicates it. There's PJM, which stands for Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Maryland, which is what Commonwealth Edison is in, and then so their service territory has PJM, and then the rest of the state is in the MISO, the Midwest Independent System Operator, that's based out of Indianapolis or Carmel, and they regulate transmission. They tell power plants when they operate based on their dispatch costs and a whole host of other complex things that goes into how a plant gets turned on and for how long and things like that. So it's all different regulations, but because we're a deregulated state, it's tough. All these power plants are independent power producers.
I guess the question is, as far as getting the Illinois economy, which we just had the election largely about, at least at the gubernatorial level, as far as getting the Illinois economy back in shape, are we going to have an energy crisis within Illinois, either as far as not having enough or having a big cost jump?
Both are possible, and This is the question that I posed to the business groups that opposed the Tenaska project of a few years ago. They came out in strong opposition, and I give them credit. I mean, they killed the Tenaska project because they convinced that the energy cost was too high and was going to drive business away. I asked those business groups, what's your alternative? Again, our power plants in Illinois are aging and can't adapt to the new standards. We need coal, gas, or just build a power plant. You're not going to build nuclear because it's hard to cite that. And because Illinois is deregulated, if you recall, the key...
We touched, if I can jump in,
Sure.
Just for time getting short, we touched on this a little bit, but what's wrong, now that we have so much natural gas in the United States, what's wrong with making those coal-fired plants operated on natural gas?
It's really, it's an engineering issue, and it's hard to go back and forth. I mean, so it's almost easier to build a base load natural gas plant, and we have some of those in Illinois. We also have peaker natural gas plants. We have one here in Springfield that for the past few years hasn't been used. We've had an interesting phenomenon the last 4 years. Energy prices in this country are at the lowest that they've been since in the last 20 years. And that's why Exelon is coming in saying that they're going to have to force the shutdown on some of their nukes because they can't operate because they can't make enough money. And consumers have benefited. I mean, this is the issue that we've had. Energy prices have been historically low, and here we are crying wolf to say power plants are going to go offline and energy prices are going to go up, but no one believes that because it hasn't happened. And I guess we continue with our predictions saying if you're going to force coal-burning power plants offline because they can't meet your standards, how are you going to replace that base load power? And it can't be renewables. And if natural gas is somewhat part of the answer, can they be built fast enough? We don't think so. And we also think the price spike history of natural gas is a bad choice for consumers to be that dependent on natural gas.
Lastly, do you know of the coal-fired plants that would be taken off, how much of the base load power that we get from them would be lost?
I don't have that off the top of my head. And frankly, I again say this not to be cute, but I really don't care. Most of the power plants in Illinois don't burn Illinois coal. I want those plants to shut down and be replaced by coal gasification plants that can burn Illinois coal, but the business groups are going to fight it like they fought Tenaska to say it's too expensive, because if you have to capture and store CO2, yes, the cost of that energy is going to be more expensive. So if that's the price you have to pay to get CO2 out of the air, then realize that and know that consumers are going to have to pay more.
And I think you would say, I mean, consumers might want to have, and they do want to have, a clean environment, but they ought to understand that in these conversations about controlling CO2, it's not an esoteric theoretical discussion that for the coal-fired plants to meet those regulations is going to be a real cost to consumers, and that would include all kinds of people who are on fixed incomes, are going to be retired, and they'll see their electricity prices spike.
Yeah, and I think that's where the president just doesn't. I don't understand why he doesn't see that. But they think that through using less electricity, that they're going to be able to survive that. And I guess kind of the final points here, Terry, that I wanted to make and reiterate again. You know, the CO2 policy is going to have less than a 2% impact on CO2 emissions worldwide. Negligible impact. So is that worth all the cost? Then this thing that just drives me crazy, and the president said it last week with the announcement with China. This is a health issue. Okay, what I tell the president, and you can tell him for me, you can send him this tape, is that go back to your biology class in 6th grade. CO2 is not a health hazard. CO2 is the life cycle of human beings. We exhale CO2, plants inhale CO2 and exhale oxygen. Miss Brown in my 6th grade biology class is probably proud of me today if she's still alive, because I remembered that from the first day of biology class. For the president to get out there and say we have to do this to protect the health of our citizens is nonsense. It's part of the life cycle of human beings. And so if it's going to be at great cost, which is going to cause economic harm to a lot of people, and it has a negligible impact on what you're trying to achieve is to reduce global CO2 emissions, why do it? And that's our why. And no one seems to want to, the proponents don't want to seem to answer that question. And unless, you go back to base load power, cheap, reliable, and plentiful. And, the renewables, and again, we are for all of the above energy strategy, and renewables have their place, but they won't replace coal or nuclear or even natural gas as base load power sources.
All right, Phil Gonet, we appreciate you joining us.